Hey everyone, you know we need lots of oil and gas to meet the huge energy demand our society has, and much of that world's oil is transported in supertankers like this one. Over the years, these ships have gotten larger and more advanced, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the 15 most amazing supertankers. Let's begin this one. Number 15. Seawise Giant. Supertankers are supersized by nature, otherwise they wouldn't carry the name they have. But even in the colossal world of supertankers, some are just bigger than others. Like most things, there is a constant battle in the supertanker world to be the biggest and the best, and the title of the world's biggest supertanker has changed hands a few times throughout history. But behold the iconic Seawise Giant. This beauty of a ship was built by Sumitomo Heavy Industries in the late 1970s. But don't let her age fool you, she remains one of the largest supertankers ever built. With a length of 1,504 feet and a beam of 225 feet with a draft of 80 feet, Seawise Giant has the greatest deadweight tonnage ever recorded. When she was fully laden, she boasted a displacement of 657,000 tons. Officially the biggest ultra-large crude carrier the world had ever seen, Seawise Giant also had a giant list of names, too. Throughout her time in service, she was also known as Knock Nevis, the Happy Giant, and the Yahar Viking. Her service saw her through some pretty tumultuous times. She was sunk during the Iran-Iraq War in 1988. But she's not a ship to go down easy. She was restored and sent back into service to ride the waves again. She rode the waters for more than 20 years before her service officially ended in 2009. She met the fate that most supertankers eventually meet. She was scrapped in 2010. But her legacy lives on. She is still the heaviest self-propelled ship of any kind in the world, as well as the longest ship ever constructed. So although she no longer sails the seas, she sails on in our memories. Number 14. TI Asia. Once known as the Hellespont Alhambra and nicknamed the White Elephant, TI Asia is a massive ultra-large crude carrier with a deadweight tonnage of 441,000. The nickname comes from the appearance of her hull, and she holds the record for being the largest double-hull tanker ever built. With a price tag of about $90 million US, TI Asia is designed to carry 3.2 million barrels of oil. She was built for the Arabian Gulf to the Peninsula and Northern European markets route. She can also travel at a speed of about 16.5 knots, which is pretty fast for a supertanker. And with a 9-cylinder engine, she's got a lot of power behind her too. And although her brilliant white color is impressive and memorable, it's not just for show. White is a reflective color, so it will actually help keep the temperature of both the decks and the cargo cooler. This will lower the amount of hydrocarbons emissions too. She's not just big and beautiful, she's also pretty environmentally friendly. The TI Asia is actually part of a large fleet, all run by Hellespont, but we'll meet the rest of those ships a little later on in the list. Number 13. Globetic Tokyo and Globetic London. Did you know that ships have sisters? Now, unlike human siblings, sister ships don't squabble, but just like human siblings, sister ships share similar traits. This is the case with the Globetic Tokyo and the Globetic London. These sister supertankers are similar in a lot of ways. For example, they both held the title of the largest supertanker in the world. Globetic Tokyo held the title first when she was born into the world in 1972. But when her sister came along in 1973, Globetic London snatched the title from her sister. Larger by only 276 deadweight tons, I can't help but wonder if sister ships have the same jealousy issues that real sisters have, especially when it comes to an older sister coveting a younger sister's accolades. In any case, both ships were built by Ishikawajima Harima Heavy Industries in Kure, Japan. They were both owned by Globetic Tankers, and they have an incredible capacity. Globetic Tokyo and Globetic London could hold 3.65 million barrels. London had a shorter life, being scrapped in 1985, with Tokyo following shortly thereafter in 1986. Regardless of their slight differences, these sister ships shared a very important commonality. They were two of the largest supertankers the world has ever seen. Number 12. Bellamya. It can be hard to ascertain how big some of the supertankers really are, especially without a point of reference. Seeing them make their way through open waters is one thing, but given the vastness of the ocean itself, they don't always look as large as they are on the open sea. When you see them at a docking station, that's when their true size really hits you. Bellamya is officially the second largest oil tanker the world has ever seen, and pics of this supertanker passing docks shows just how big she actually is. Bellamya had a length of 1,359 feet and a gross tonnage of 274,000. She was built by Chantier de l'Antique and was operated by Shell Maritime in France. Classified as a ULCC, Bellamya had a fairly long life in service. She served from 1976 to 1986. But her life was not really overly productive, though, because during her time in service, the oil market was in a bit of a decline. Plus, the beautiful Bellamya was just too big to operate in some important areas, so she wasn't used as much as some other supertankers. As such, her owners decided to toss in the towel. She was laid up in Norway in 1984. Not all was lost, though. She was sent to South Korea where she was scrapped, so pieces of this iconic ship are probably still out there somewhere, serving as parts of other ships. Number 11. Eagle Trader. Some of the tankers on this list were laid to rest at the bottom of the ocean when they sank. Others were retired and scrapped when they weren't needed anymore, or because they were too big to do what they needed to do, or they were broken. But Eagle Trader is alive and well and currently in service, so you can actually spot this supertanker out on the open waters. As a VLCC, Eagle Trader is hard to miss. She's operated by MOL Tank Ship Management Asia, and like all MOL ships, Eagle Tanker has a double engine. She can run on methanol as well as standard ship fuel, which is pretty impressive. Eagle Trader is only a toddler in tanker years. She was built in 2018 by Mitsui Engineering and Shipbuilding. She's currently sailing under the Japanese flag, and Eagle Trader has a length of about 1,112 feet and a deadweight capacity of 312,000 tons, making her one of the largest oil tankers currently in service. Eagle Trader might only be a toddler in tanker years, but she's a full-grown supertanker in size, as pictures of her out on the water clearly show. Number 10. Esso Northumbria. Sometimes it's nice to give a nod to the past, which is why Esso Northumbria is included today. Esso Northumbria was the first ship in a series of very large crude carrier ships. She was built by Swan Hunter in 1969. Esso Northumbria was launched on May 2nd that same year. With a length of 1,143 feet, a depth of 84 feet, and a beam of 170 feet, she spent some time in the tanker limelight, as she was the largest vessel to have been built in Britain at that time. Affectionately nicknamed Big Geordie, Esso Northumbria could travel at a top speed of 18 miles an hour, and while she was designed to have a long and productive life, it just wasn't meant to be. Esso Northumbria was forced into an early retirement in 1982 after years and years of problems. From cracking hulls to many operating snafu, Esso Northumbria only spent 12 years in service before she met her final resting place, the scrapyard in Taiwan. Perhaps there are still pieces of her floating around on other ships, like some sort of supertanker horcrux. Number 9. SS Tory Canyon. Most supertankers are too big to travel through the Suez Canal, and since that canal is a pretty important navigational landmark, ships that can't go through it have fewer options for port visitation than those that can. SS Tory Canyon was an LR2 Suez Max class of oil tankers, and you guessed it, that means she could transit the canal. Suez Max refers to a type of tanker that can go through the Suez Canal, so while the SS Tory might not be the biggest tanker around, she was more versatile than some of her bigger counterparts. She was laid to rest a while back, though, when she ran aground and caused a pretty significant environmental disaster. This incident happened in March of 1967 and caused her to sink, but before then she had a fortuitous life. She had a cargo capacity of 118,000 long tons of crude oil. She could also travel at about 20 miles an hour, and she was owned by the Barracuda Tanker Corporation. Her port of registry was Liberia, and she was built by Newport News Shipbuilding. This Suez Canal navigating supertanker first hit the water in October of 1958 for her launch. Almost a decade old when she went down, she had a longer life than some other tankers on this list. Number 8. Exxon Valdez. Alright, switching gears a bit with this next entry to a tanker that wasn't just amazing in size, it caused an amazingly horrific environmental disaster. When the Exxon Valdez was first launched in 1986, she hoped to earn bragging rights for her size. Built by National Steel and Shipbuilding Company, the supertanker was 987 feet long with a deadweight tonnage of 214,000. She was a pretty big sight to behold and earned several additional nicknames throughout her service. She also went by Sea River, Oriental Nicety, and the Mediterranean. But when she ran aground on March 24, 1989, she was instantly painted with a much darker brush. She caused one of the worst and largest environmental disasters in United States history. The Exxon Valdez collided with land in Prince William Sound, Alaska, and this massive oops caused her to release 11 million gallons of oil out into the ocean. 11 million, damn. More than 1,300 miles of shoreline was affected, and hundreds of thousands of seabirds were killed. Bald eagles, harbor seals, killer whales, they were all affected too by the spill. The effects of the Exxon Valdez's spill was so far-reaching, it's impossible to list everything that was affected here. But needless to say, it's not her size that she'll be remembered for, even though she was one of the biggest supertankers around in her day. Number 7. DHT Colt. Built by Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering Corporation, a company who clearly has a strong hold on the supertanker building industry, given the number of tankers they've built, DHT Colt is a very large crude carrier, or VLCC for short. DHT Colt was built in 2018 and has a double hull, along with all the bells and whistles of the latest maritime technology. As a newer tanker, DHT produces lower carbon emissions than some of the older tankers around, as well as being faster and more productive. This fancy tanker is currently operated by the independent crude oil tanker company DHT Management and sails under the Hong Kong flag. She's got a carrying capacity of 163,000 tons and can travel through the water at a max speed of about 11 knots. And with a length of 1,102 feet, the Colt isn't just technologically advanced, she's also really long. Number 6. Burj Emperor and Burj Empress. Alright, the next two supertankers sound like they belong in a royal hall, which is strange because the word Regal doesn't exactly come to mind when you think of these things. Big, yes, and bulky, maybe, but Regal conjures up images of things refined, which is the complete opposite of a supertanker. The Burj Emperor and the Burj Empress are another set of tankers. They don't really differ that much, so they belong together on this list. In fact, they're not just sister ships, they're twins. Those two twin sister supertankers were both built in 1975 from the country that seems to bring us a lot of supertankers, Japan. And although they were twins with similar specs, they weren't scrapped at the same time. The Burj Empress lived longer, actually a lot longer in fact. The Burj Empress served 8 years longer than the Burj Emperor. The Emperor was scrapped in 1986 and the Empress followed suit 8 years later. Although they're called twins, they did have a different gross tonnage though, so technically they're not identical twins, they were fraternal. Burj Emperor had a gross tonnage of 203,000 and Burj Empress had a gross tonnage of 198,000. They both had the same length though, 1,252 feet, and yes, they were both two of the largest supertankers ever built. Number 5. Esso Atlantic. Esso. It's hard to think of gasoline without the Esso emblem coming to mind. The name Esso actually comes from the phonetic pronunciation of the first two letters in the word Standard Oil, S and O. And given Esso's history and track record with all things oil, you better believe this company has some pretty big supertankers at its disposal. In fact, it would be pretty hard to make a list of the most amazing supertankers and not include any owned by Esso. One of the reasons of this is because they own some really big ones, which we'll get into in a minute, but another reason is that they have some in service. Most of the supertankers on this list are no longer in service because there was a drastic decline in ULCCs, but Esso's are. So let's take a look at one of Esso's biggest supertankers, the Esso Atlantic. When the Esso Atlantic was completed, she broke a world record. The Esso Atlantic was one of only 7 ships in history to have a deadweight capacity that surpassed 500,000 tons. Her official deadweight tonnage was 516,895 tons. And while that is pretty mind-boggling, even her gross tonnage is impressive at 259,000. She also had a pretty long run. She was in service from 1977 to 2002. She was built by Hitachi Zosen Corporation in Ariake, Japan. She was also operated by the Esso Tankers Incorporated. But like all ULCCs, she couldn't get through the most important international canals, the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, and the English Channel. So what do you do with a supertanker that can't navigate important shipping routes? Well, you send it over to the Bahamas. And that's what happened to Esso Atlantic in 1983. She operated there until 2002, when she was sold for scrap to shipbreakers. Number 4. Pierre Gamma. Bearing a namesake can be a pretty important thing. Sometimes it can be a burden to bear, like the pressures of royalty to hold up a family name. Sometimes it's an honor, sometimes it's both. Supertankers are often named for the companies that commissioned them, but that's not always the case. This next ship, for example, Pierre Gamma, carries the name of a pretty significant person. Pierre Gamma was a Battleless-class supertanker and was one of the 4 in the class. Built in 1977, Pierre Gamma was named after the famous French politician of the same name, a minister of national education and minister of the armies under French President Charles de Gaulle. So, with a namesake like that, Pierre Gamma, the ship, had some pretty big shoes to fill. And she tried. She earned points for her size. At 1,359 feet long and with a gross tonnage of 274,000, she held her own against the world's biggest supertankers. But the very thing that earned her fame was also one of the things that worked against her. She was too big to traverse the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal, being an important international hub of transportation, was and still is an integral part of shipping. So those who can't pass through it are somewhat limited in the ports they can visit. And so the story goes with Pierre Gamma, the massive supertanker who can't travel through the Suez Canal. The ship changed hands in 1983, where she was served under a new name, the Ulsan Master for the Hyundai Corporation. But that didn't last long. Pierre Gamma was scrapped within a year of changing hands. Number 3. Chevron Pegasus Voyager Series. The Pegasus Voyager series is a bit of a mouthful, as well as a confusing mess of mixed imagery. Is it a gas carrier, a traveler of some sort, a flying horse? No, it is, of course, a supertanker. Well, it's not just one supertanker, it's not even just two, it's 3 massive supertankers. Well, it's actually 7, but I'll get to that later. For now, this is the Chevron Pegasus Voyager series. Given the fact that they're all really similar, I thought it best to give them all the same spot on this list. All 3 of the very large crude carriers, a classification that means they're all between 200,000 and 300,000 deadweight tons. This is smaller than the ultra-large crude carriers, which have to be more than 300,000 tons deadweight to meet that classification. But they still fall within the category of supertankers. And now you know more about supertanker classification than you probably ever wanted to know. So let's take a look at these 3 VLCCs. Houston Voyager, Pascagoula Voyager, and San Ramon Voyager. They can all accommodate around 2 million barrels of oil, and they were all built at Daewoo Shipping and Marine Engineering in 2019. They were all built by Moran Tankers, and they were all operated by Chevron. And they all have similar specs, just over 1,100 feet long. They are all under the Bahamas flag, and they all trade primarily between the Arabian Gulf and the United States, according to Chevron's website. So unlike a lot of supertankers on this list, these 3 are still in service to date. All in, there are actually 7 identical ships in the series. The Richmond Voyager and the El Segundo Voyager came before these 3, and the London Voyager and the Singapore Voyager came after. Altogether, they make up a pretty fierce fleet of supertanking perfection, able to carry a combined 14 million barrels of oil. Number 2. Prairial. Prairial was built for the Compagnie Nationale de Navigation in 1979, and she was historic because she was the very last vessel in the Battleless-class supertanker. But no need to cry, she had a good life. She was in fact the only ship in her class that served for longer than 10 years, so Prairial is more of a source of celebration than lament. Perhaps her long life and service was the source of her many names, or maybe people just really like giving supertankers lots of names, because that seems to be the case with a lot of these ships. But in any case, she was also known as the Sea Brilliance, Hellas Foss, the Sea Giant, not to be confused with Seawise Giant. During her time in service, she was quite the little globetrotter. She saw lots of different ports, more than a lot of supertankers do. She saw Le Havre when it first went by the name Prairial, Panama City when she was Sea Brilliance, Piraeus when she answered to Hellas Foss, and Monrovia under her name Sea Giant. Her service wasn't continual, though. She actually was laid up for a while with the other ships in her class in 1983. She spent a couple of years just kicking it in Norway until she was sold in 1985, and along with a fruitful and productive life, she also holds the record for being the 3rd biggest ship ever constructed. Prairial had a length of 1,359 feet, a draft of 93 feet, and a speed of about 16 knots. And she could travel at a speed of about 16 knots. She was eventually scrapped, however, at the Gandhani shipbreaking yard in Pakistan in September 2003, which goes to show it doesn't matter how many names or how many ports you visit. All ships are headed to the same place in the end, scrap. Although I'd like to think there's some sort of eternal scrapyard in the sky where they never really are taken apart and they can live out their days docked and resting. That would be nice. Number 1. TI-class supertankers. Okay, the final spot on this list goes to an entire class of supertankers. We've already met the stunning TI Asia, but her appearance earlier on in the video was just whetting your appetite. This entry, we're taking a look at all of them. The TI supertankers are the largest oil tankers in service today. Furthermore, they're also some of the largest oil tankers that the world has ever seen. And unlike the others who have come before them, these tankers are very much in service. So if you're lucky, you might get a chance to see one for yourself. If not, well, there's always this video. There are 4 TI-class supertankers in total: TI Africa, Asia, Europe, and Oceania. The fleet is operated by Tankers International LLC, which is where the TI in their name comes from. They were all built by Daewoo Shipbuilding and Maritime Engineering in 2003 for the company Hellespont, and they all have a length of 1,247 feet and a gross tonnage of 234,000 gross tons. But their amazing attributes don't stop there. These ships are the first ULCCs to be built in 25 years, so they're marking the comeback of ULCCs. TI Europe is actually the largest, with a gross tonnage of 441,893. It was the third in the class to be built, and it was once known as the Hellespont Tara. TI Asia, who we've already met, was eventually converted to an offloading vessel, so she doesn't run with the others anymore. This also happened to TI Africa, who was once the Hellespont Metropolis. And although they aren't doing the same thing as the other 2 in their fleet, both Asia and Africa are still in service today. TI Oceania, on the other hand, originally called Hellespont Fairfax, has been in active service since 2002. She is, hands down, the most famous of the 4. She appeared on a TV show called Super Ships and is the most well-recognized of them all, although they're pretty all recognizable in their own right. Some other interesting facts are that they're all pretty fast for supertankers. They all feature some pretty advanced designs, and they all boast that pretty pearly white. In any case, they're all pretty incredible, which is why these supersized ships, the TI class, have earned the top spot on this list of the top 15 amazing supertankers. I'll see you tomorrow. Watch our Vehicles playlist for more top 15 videos about amazing vehicles. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best vehicle videos.